Hello, product people. Welcome to the Product for Product podcast, hosted by Matt Green, data advocate and product manager, and Moshe product leader and author. Our goal is to serve the product community by helping you find products that can help make your work in product management easier. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Product for Product podcast.
Welcome back. Today we're happy to have Wes Galliher on the show to talk about the tool Pivotal Tracker. Wes is the head of product at Productable. How you doing, Wes?
Doing great, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Welcome to the show. Hey, Moshe.
Hey, Matt. Hey, Wes. Great to have you here on the show. Tell us first about yourself, who you are, where you're working, and then we'll dive into Pivotal Tracker.
Sure. Yeah. I work for Productable. I'm the head of product. I joined them about a year and a half ago to help them build a innovation management software platform that really is helping connect all of the most critical pieces of an innovation ecosystem, from the portfolio management piece to the progress and updates to empowering the people and the innovators and making sure that they're leveraging the best expertise available. So before that, I worked for a product management software company, ProdPad, and also worked at Pivotal Labs, which was a software design and development consultancy where I used Pivotal Tracker, which we're going to be talking about today.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, ProdPad is one of the episodes we had, right, Moshe?
Did we have ProdPad?
I think we did. We did.
Sure. Yeah, I don't remember if we had it or not, but
happy to connect you to some folks there if you'd like.
Yes, exactly. No, actually, we usually talk with the users, not with the providers. Right. Like we talk with you today about Pivotal Tracker. But who knows? I mean, if we didn't have one, then we will always be happy to do another one.
Always looking for new ones.
Exactly. So let's start diving into Pivotal Tracker. So this is in our series of backlogs and agile tools. Tell us about it. I don't know how known it is out there. In the survey that we had, I put it in there as the third option. And I think you were the only one that said you're using it.
Yeah, it's actually not. It's obviously not nearly as well known as many of the other options that are out there. You know, the Jiras and things of the world. Even some of the entrants with utilizing even some of the no or low code platforms like a Notion as a backlog management system. But Pivotal Tracker was really built by Pivotal Labs when they were so Pivotal Labs was also building a platform as a service, and they realized when we started the product management arm of that company that they really needed something that met their needs. So I think it was well used in the clients that Pivotal Labs had, because it is a very opinionated backlog management software. So you only see it in a 1 to n in terms of user stories, top to bottom. There isn't a Kanban view or timeline view of when stories are going to be completed, of things like that. So I think that makes it a little bit less popular because it is so opinionated. But that's probably an assumption on my part about why it might be less utilized.
Yeah, and I can tell you that the reason I put it in the survey was because I put the 3 systems that I used in the past or using today. So I put in there Jira, I put Azure DevOps, and I put Pivotal because I did use Pivotal in one of the organizations where I worked. And actually, that was one of those things that always felt a bit, strange to me, that it's very opinionated and it tells me how I need to do things.
Yeah,
which is quite different from the other systems.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, even in my history, so I worked for Pivotal Labs, which was trying to be a big champion of a better way to do things and following lean product, user-centered design, XP. So you'll notice the tracker is very aligned with extreme programming kind of methodology. And so seeing those as kind of the best practice to transform the way that people were building software, I aligned with opinionated software. And then when I joined ProdPad, it was similar from a product management perspective. So I have pulled both of those products into my current role here at Productable.
I see. So tell us, what does it mean really that it's very opinionated? I mean, does it have a workflow and it kind of force you to go through that workflow?
Yeah, so it's basically meaning. I think the biggest way it's opinionated is it only has that top to bottom prioritization. So it forces you to go through that. It isn't so only until recently did they put out a feature that allowed you to set a priority rating on a user story from like critical to all the way down to low or no priority. And that's because the assumption about with product is that the highest priority things you should be at the top of the backlog, and you work on those next. You don't just jump around and pick things out of the backlog to work on, because then you run into problems with actually working on the highest priority things, and you end up working on low-hanging fruit but not solving the biggest problems.
Right. And that's really how it should be. You should be working on the highest level priority rather than on whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what it's opinionated. But how do you set up those high level priorities? How does that work?
Yeah, and this is where I believe that some teams try to utilize other backlog management tools for backlog management and release management and like product backlog management. And so I think it's very strongly opinionated that your priorities should be set in your product management tool, which we use ProdPad for. And only when it's ready for the next couple of sprints or iterations do you want to put that into your backlog management tool for that upcoming release or two. And so one of the challenges, which we can get into later about Pivotal Tracker, is like the icebox can get very unwieldy. And if you end up putting so much stuff in the icebox, it's hard to navigate to say, oh, what do we need to be working on next? Like that decision should be made elsewhere. And so really the icebox should be very small, because the things that you want to work on in the next couple of two sprints or so should be in the backlog manager like Pivotal Tracker, but then the rest should be in a product strategy tool to decide priority. So really you're doing backlog grooming with a smaller set of user stories to say, okay, are these fully complete and ready for estimation? So we run our backlog grooming session in Pivotal Tracker, and then once that has been those have been groomed, then we do our iteration planning meeting with all of the developers to estimate the stories, and then move those. And so then there's that set in the 1 to n priority. And then the developers just pick up the next story off the top of the backlog.
Okay,
so there are a couple of interesting things in play here. One of them is, and we talked about it in the past in the context of other systems, where do you want to have specialized systems that work with each other, but each one is specializing in one specific area, or do you want to have one platform that does it all? And some people prefer this and some prefer that, right?
Right.
And that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, which I'm not sure if we touched about in the past, but if someone is new into it, or they really want to have best practices rather than try to learn it on their own or reinvent it, if you may, then if they use a system like that give you those best practices built in because it's enforced you to do something, then maybe it's easier to start. Is that the case?
Yeah, I believe so. It's easier for someone that is interested in following best practices. It is harder for someone like that is trying to champion best practices across an organization that doesn't support that. And this I've found to be true in backlog management and in product strategy tools, that there's an old way of doing things that people have gotten used to, stakeholders, that there's, wondering, well, why is it this way? And you end up having to spend more time doing what product has to do often, which is influence stakeholders. But I do believe that Pivotal Tracker makes it easier to get started. And actually, as a small startup, it's very affordable because we're still on the free plan. And so it allows you to get started, do kind of enforce good habits. And so I believe strongly that is a good approach. But answering your first question, Moshe, is I do believe that it's better to have targeted, focused tools on doing what they do best instead of trying to be a tool that rules them all. And I think about the multifunction copier, printer, scanners that didn't ever do any of the three very well. So it was never a great printer. There was never a great scanner. So I think about you focusing on the tools that you need to do their job the best, and then integrate with the others. So that's what we do we use ProdPad for strategy, and then when it's ready, when we actually write user stories in ProdPad and then push them to Pivotal Tracker, and that in that integration, then we do the backlog grooming and refinement in Tracker.
Very cool. Is your engineering group also using Pivotal Tracker?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
that's primarily who's using it. So
Okay.
we have our engineers in there and our product managers in there, and then we do have a designer who we're now pushing the limits of the free plan, where we're going to have to get more seats to support the design to be in there. Right now, he's in there very rarely. Like we'll be able to do the backlog grooming, just screen sharing and other things, or he'll add, he has a viewer role, of course, but be able to add just comments to it, to add like our design debt stories.
One of the things we talked about was the involvement of Azure DevOps, Jira, and the involvement of product and engineering, all, and even design, all within the tool itself.
The nice thing about that, Matt, is that product spends a lot less time in there than engineering does, like, because I want product to stay in the product strategy tool to really determine priority, to shape that work, and then push that to the development tool that the developers can focus on. Now, the developers have visibility into ProdPad, our product strategy tool, for sure, but we want them. So I think there's a good delineation between product and engineering there, and design spends a lot more time in the product strategy tool.
Now, what about the workflows? So you said there is no Kanban or Scrum board?
It's not a visible like layout Kanban like you used to seeing in a Trello or other things, but the Kanban is the workflow of the buttons. So in Pivotal Tracker, when you create a story, it first has no like start button, because you haven't yet estimated the complexity and effort. So there's that. So it gives you an opportunity to score it, or whatever you want to call it. And then once you've done that, there's a start button that's the developers that will click start when they start working on said user story. And then that will move that story. And I use air quotes move, because it moves just visibly. The button changes to a finish state, so that when the developer is finished, they can click finish. And depending on how your workflows go, for us, that means that it is done coding in our development environment. And then when they deliver it to the QA environment, that's when they click finish to go to the deliver state. And that then puts it in a accept reject state for the product manager to go review it in QA, and then accept or reject the story. And then once it's accepted, it moves into the done and out of your view. So it is technically a Kanban, but it's just in button state changes.
Right. So, and people do they like it, or they're just get used to it?
I think it's a little bit of get used to it, because I think what it's trying to do is allow you to focus on the stories that you're working on at hand. And so, like, as a product person, I want to look at all of these stories that are in this dark blue finish state, which means that's what's currently work in progress, right? I want to keep the WIP as low as possible. And so when I'm able to just quickly scan that, it's a similar, I mean, it's, to one, half dozen one way or the other, but I like it. But that also, I've used it for so many years and gotten used to it. I appreciate that. It
Right.
does, the focus is where I think the opinionated part comes into play, where you're not necessarily just looking at one column in a Kanban board and so having to prioritize it for one, or having people just jump around and pick things. So I understand that there's this sense of time that a left to right Kanban board, communicates. But that, to me, I think going into, again, the opinionated part of Pivotal Tracker is that it's not about how long things are taking, that it doesn't really show you that sense of time per se. There is an estimation about what stories you can get done in a iteration, but it's not meant to be like, okay, this is going to be this many weeks or something like that. So that takes a little bit of the time component out, because so many development teams have been measured and pressured on how quickly they can churn outputs out and stories out. And that's one of the big features of Pivotal Tracker is like it's looking at average velocity, average. There is a velocity score, but it's also looking at variability. So it's like how the whole objective of analytics and measuring the team is about how can you consistently deliver the same velocity. So the velocity may be lower, but you can consistently deliver it. So that means you can predict with more confidence in the future how long things might take because you have a consistent velocity. What happens with a lot of teams is like they just work, 24/7 for like 3 days straight, and their velocity just spikes, and then their velocity is like net zero for the next 2 weeks because they just burn themselves out. That isn't helpful for anybody to predict going forward. So Tracker is actually focused more on averages and looking at the variability in that velocity score.
You're saying a lot of my favorite words, especially with analytics. So, so it looks like it does have dashboarding analytic capability. Are you leveraging what's in that tool, Pivotal Tracker?
Yeah. So one of the downfalls of using that, and one of the reasons I haven't used it quite as extensively, I have in the past, I believe it requires a consistent team, right? So the more that you swap out team members or the team size reduces or increases, that predictability is going to vary drastically. And so I'm not so focused on that. And arguably when we're at a startup, so we're building, things are changing rapidly, priorities sometimes change rapidly. And so those analytics actually are probably showing a worse story than is actually accurate.
Happening. Yeah.
Right. So I don't want to put that on to the developers. So they basically put a negative light on their ability to deliver work. But I do look at it in terms of variability when we're getting to that steady state. And I say like, okay, are we getting to some consistency? Are our processes repeatable and people are getting custom and used to it? So that's been helpful. We're about to go into a big hiring mode, so I know that is going to change. So I wouldn't be focusing on it as much.
And do you hear from people that have used used Jira? Because most chances are that when you hire someone, they will come with some experience from other systems. Do you hear from them how easy it is to them to get used to Pivotal Tracker?
I haven't really heard strongly either way. Actually, when I was at Pivotal and we had clients that had come from other systems, they felt like it was easy to use. And now part of it, I was working alongside them to help guide them, but that I did have some positive experiences switching from something else, just because opinionated software typically means there's fewer features, not more. So the more features you incorporate, sometimes the harder it is to do the job you want to do. So I think that plays in its favor in terms of like onboarding time. But at the same time, I think there are probably, I think other stakeholders that might be used to seeing reports and other things from a Jira or Line or Azure DevOps, I think that they might have more difficulty seeing like what's going on with Tracker because it is so focused on the development and extreme programming methodology and less on reporting and analytics on how is your engineering organization performing.
And I do remember when I started using it back then, it was actually not that hard to get into. But I was looking for those features like in Jira. So that's where I was like, oh, so how do I do this? And how do I do that? So it was always like comparing and trying to see. And then I learned that they basically are very opinionated about these things. And it was also not really, it wasn't my decision to use that tool or to use another tool. So I kind of like, let's see how it works, right?
And we've had to, sometimes you have to hack any software tool a little bit to make it work for your context, right? And I think you had to do that with Tracker. It has development tool integrations with like a GitHub, like your code base management, so that you can track deploys if you want to use that specifically. It also allows you to customize the scoring scales so that if you wanted to use a Fibonacci scoring versus a 0 to 10 or anything like that, it unfortunately it doesn't. If you change your scoring scale, like it doesn't like retroactively kind of update the previous estimations. So projecting that those scores are a little bit more challenging there. And then they've expanded the ability to add templates for user stories, bug reports, and things like that, which we utilize pretty regularly because, who wants to actually type out those things every time?
Right.
Mentioned integration. So you're obviously integrated with ProdPad. You mentioned GitHub. Are you integrating with something like Slack or Teams?
Yes. Yeah. Yep. So I guess I always think about an integration with Slack as like a table stakes these days. So it's integrated in Slack. So you get notifications for any changes to stories or things that are pushed. And that's, they do have flexibility in terms of turning on which notifications you want to be notified for, either in Slack or an email. I tend to have both of them turned on and just filtered appropriately. But yeah, integrated with Slack, ProdPad. We're not actually integrating it with GitHub, but partly because of we're doing so much of this in the low-code platform that we use. And so we do have a GitHub repo for React, which is another component of our platform. And I'm trying to think of any. They do have so webhooks. You can integrate with that. I tried to integrate it with Zapier, and it does have you can use Zapier, if this then that happens, to do some other things, but it's relatively limited in terms of what you can do with Zapier. It's more about like a story created, a story like delivered or completed, and like changing. It doesn't do the granularity of like comments or changing states or other things. It didn't have as much flexibility in Zapier that I wanted to make it useful.
Yeah. Okay. Another thing we like to ask is for like the top 3 things that you love about the product and the top 3 things that you would like to see improved about the product. So let's maybe start off with those.
Sure. I'll start off with the good things. I'll try to start off that way. So as we've talked about already, I think I love that it's opinionated, that it forces a top to bottom priority. Part of this is because it helps in communicate the best practice to all of the development team as well, right? I think of product teams as like the balanced team of engineering, product, and design. And so I want everyone to understand the best practice in each of those disciplines, and not to the detailed level, but I think Pivotal Tracker supports being able to kind of like encourage that good practice. And it also, I like that. I do like the averaging and variability of velocity instead of just showing velocity scores. Other tools may do that as well, but that's something that I value because I know how detrimental to development teams that can be. And so I definitely appreciate that. And then the third thing that I like the most, I think so for me, it's the fact that it integrates with ProdPad to me is really critical because we wouldn't really be able to use it. I think that the product strategy tool is critical and central to so many other areas. And so those are probably the biggest 3 things. I think the things that it could improve upon, I think even just further integrations that would be like supported natively. I can imagine even integrating with design tools like a Figma or a Zeppelin. Actually, Zeppelin is what we use, but we always just have to drop links in there or put them into ProdPad. So that's one thing that I haven't really looked into being able to do. And I think so they have incorporated design reviews. So like there's this ability to add like code reviews or security team reviews or design reviews types, which is good, but I think it's really not. It's not a really thought out experience, and I think it ends up adding a little bit more bureaucracy to the system. So that leaves a little bit to be desired. And then the last thing that I think could be improved is it is very difficult to sort of structure or group stories. So you can tag with epics and you can tag with just any tag. And then we sort of hack the system to use what are called release markers in Tracker to provide sections. So like things you want to maybe triage or things you want to like consider for the prioritization, like in the icebox, it's really not there's no good way of like sectioning out stories. You have to use like emoji arrows to like say these stories are this. So that's something that I think I miss a little bit.
Now, you confessed to me earlier that you never used Jira, so you're one of those unicorns out there.
Yeah, the outlier.
But because sometimes it's nice to hear how it differs from other system, but and also why would someone want to pick it up rather than something else. But I think we touched a lot about things that Pivotal Tracker could be very useful for people. So and you mentioned also there is a free tier, so it's actually just easy to pick up and start seeing for yourself if it's the right tool for you. You also worked for Pivotal Labs before. Does that give you any additional power over there to convince them to add new features that you want?
That's it's funny you asked that. I didn't actually mention this in the 3 best features, but one of the things, I have almost never experienced a bug in Pivotal Tracker. Like I've used it since 2015, and so I was a client of Pivotal Labs first when I worked in healthcare, and we used Pivotal Tracker for that. And then I joined Pivotal Labs and used it throughout my time there. And then I actually at ProdPad we used Trello for the development team used Trello. But then and then when I joined Productable, I used Tracker. So in that entire time, I've never had to report a bug or even experienced really a bug in the core functionality. Now, I can't say the same on the engineering side. The engineers may have reported some things that ran into issues. The challenge that Pivotal Tracker has is Pivotal Inc. was acquired by VMware before I left to join ProdPad. And then now there's actually a potential pending acquisition of VMware by Broadcom. And so when it comes to like supporting Tracker and releasing new functionality, that is next to none. And I haven't had to engage with customer support, but I do know they do still support it. And like I said, they recently launched this priority feature for user stories, but that the new functionality that's coming out is not very common, and it's kind of questionable. Like VMware has a labs and component that is using Tracker, and then I just don't know how big their team is at Pivotal Tracker. So are you fearing also that they might sunset it? That's a great question. I haven't really. There's a lot more bigger fears at a startup that I have to worry about.
Sure, of course.
and worst case scenario, I have to export the data.
Right.
But arguably, like we're focused on the here and now and the near future. So I'm not too concerned about that. And I think that I'll take, even if I do adopt something like a Jira, I will bring these best practices and sort of try to use Jira in that way if it even supports it.
Yeah, and that goes also to a question we usually ask about the company behind it. So you are already answered our question. And I did check. We did have an episode with ProdPad. You're right, Matt, with Eddie Sawyer.
Okay. From Tillo. Tillo.
He's Eddie's over there. Yep.
Yeah,
it was episode 12. Almost a year ago, back on June 24th. So
you see, that's why I can't remember anymore.
Yeah, no, I actually went back. I wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy by saying that earlier. I was like, I know we had a show on that. That means we're going well when we're starting to forget where our shows line up. So
absolutely
right. Perfect. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. It's always interesting to learn about these systems. Maybe if you can just mention a bit about their user interface, how friendly it is.
Yeah, no, I think it's very friendly. I mean, they do have a basic product tour kind of as you're getting started. I think I ended up skipping through it because I was so familiar with it. But the interface is relatively simple. Oh, and that does remind me about another thing I really like about it is if you're managing, you can actually manage multiple backlogs in the same UI, and you can control like, and having them side to side, you can move stories between different product backlogs if you want. I tend to prefer to put all of my products, any team that's working together should be in the same backlog and tool. So, but I think the interface is actually very intuitive. And even talking to developers, developers don't get confused by it or how to do something. The product managers, there's sometimes some trickiness in terms of opening up the description field. There's like a preview of what you're writing in the user story description, and then like a writing mode. But that's a very minor thing. But everything else seems to be very intuitive in terms of how you're moving stories, how you're progressing them, how you're attaching things or commenting or breaking down tasks for a user story.
Yeah, that's so important sometimes. Some of these tools, I'm thinking of Jira, maybe even Azure DevOps, where we're trying to do everything and give you everything, and sometimes it becomes cumbersome. And especially when you're onboarding new product people, they can become lost within the system itself, and especially when it's hyper, configurable. I think in a show we'll release soon with Sam, we talked about Jira and how it does have a lot of configurability to it. So,
but you sometimes need a dedicated person who's the Jira expert to show you the ropes.
That's exactly one of the things we talked about. So, but when you're onboarding someone new, they have to get up to speed. But when you're having a tool like Pivotal Tracker where they can get on board and get up to speed very quickly and start to produce value right away is very important. So that's great to hear. Yeah.
Or for small teams or startups that don't have the time or the aptitude to go and configure something very complex.
Yep.
They want something very simple. So
there were even product people at Pivotal, I believe, that used Pivotal Tracker for their personal life. They would just use it to manage things, and exactly.
That's great
because it's free and simple.
Yeah, perfect. That's great to hear. You always wonder if people inside the company are actually using the tool they're building. So that's awesome to hear about them.
Yeah, we're doing that at Productable.
Yep, dog fooding. It's good. It's a good way to do it.
So before we end up, Wes, where can people find you?
Oh, thanks for asking. So you can reach out to me via email, wes@beproductable.com, or I'm on Twitter @Wes Galliher, so my first and last name, or on LinkedIn /Wes Galliher. So would love to hear from any of the listeners. Happy to answer any more questions about Tracker or anything else.
Perfect.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Wes, for joining us on the show. This has been a pleasure. Wish you and the team over there at Productable all the best. Thank you, Moshe. Thank you, all the listeners. And we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Have a great day.